Vandermania. I think it was a little right-wing state down in Vandermania. Jeffrey Robinson's hypothetical run, what was it, a Monday or 2 Mondays ago? It's such a Monday ago. If anyone taped that, I would really appreciate being able to borrow a copy of that, which would be returned sometime this week. We need to show it tomorrow night. We're organising last minute for a meeting, as always. And so...
Who's this for, IFA?
This is for IFA.
IFA's the International Federation for Firing Up Other People. What is IFA?
Indigenous Flora and Fauna Association.
Right.
But could be called the Indigenous Flora Fascist Association sometimes.
Yeah.
So if anyone's got a copy of that or knows of anyone who has copied it, could they please ring up either when the interview with Mr. Cohen's running or after 7 o'clock.
Oh, no, now Angus is out there.
Yeah, well, Angus can get the phone or anyone out there on 419-2066, and that would be most appreciated.
Certainly would be. Yes, we've got the interview with Barry Cohen, and before we play it, just a little quick rundown of what's going on, I suppose, politically. One of the big things, we did a bit of a rev up for people in St Kilda this morning. I'll rev up again for people in St Kilda. It's incredible, isn't it, that if you think back, who was alive? Who can remember 1972? But if you think back to the days of activism, if a scheme was proposed like St Kilda Marina Development or the Station Pier Development or San Remo, that certainly has attracted its share of local flack. In those days, everyone would be up in arms, you'd think. And at St Kilda, you'd think the hotbed of radicalism, all those artists staring glibly at the world, they're setting to change by coloured pictures and performers showing us the shocking side of working class life in the western suburbs and unreal films and real working class punk bands and teeth gnashing all over the place, and yet nothing's happening down there. You know, the old residents groups are sort of pulling 150 people and no one's firing up, and there doesn't appear to be any fire in the belly action. One of the reasons is that many people have become very disenchanted with their politic, and disenchanted to the point where they talk about it all the time. So to do anything is just to contradict yourself. If you tell everyone you're not interested in politics and all of a sudden take an interest, it doesn't look good on your calendar. Now, Barry Cohen is the Federal Minister for the Environment, and there's several ways of tackling an interview with him. I did my first and lost my virginity to a Federal Minister. Not on his table. I was going to be careful. Desktop, yeah, you've got to be a bit careful on that. I didn't do that. But as far as interviewing went, and tried not to hassle him. The point is this. You want to try to get an idea how the dude works. What makes him tick? What kind of information will make him change his mind? And that's the whole thing. If you're individually sitting out there, whether you be in Mildura or North Coast of Tasmania or in Melbourne or even in St Kilda, and you're thinking of doing something, you've just got to get the facts together, a little bit of a rappy poos on the phone and talk to a few crew, and then think when you approach people how you will best communicate with them to get them to do what you want them to do. You can win lots of political points like Bill Hare did this morning in an interview he did on Schillberger with Don Braben, a long-time advocate of forestry who's never going to change his mind. You score lots of political points saying that, look, you're destroying animals and you're doing this and you're doing that and you're doing the other. But what will you actually achieve? What you've got to find, whether you're talking to a sawmiller or whether you're talking to a conservationist or whether you're talking to the neighbour next door who you want to get the cat out of your native garden of, if you want to find some common ground with those people, that's the go. The common ground, what you agree on, not what you disagree on. Okay, with that in mind and all my excuses given, and I do rave on a bit in the interview and my apologies given for that too, we'll go into interview Barry Cohen. But first, just one quick note before Roger dashes across and does push-button athletics. That's prom trip. The very last prom trip, your last chance to wade among the seagrass, your last chance to putt out round the prom and past the islands. Like that Easter trip was just bloody mind-blowing. What else? We've raved about prom trip often enough. If you've never been on one, give us a ring, 419-2066. And now we've got two people on the phones. If you want to go on a prom trip, or you do feel sufficiently inspired to do something about St Kilda, or you just want to berate us because we've got a tape on, we can afford to talk to you. But with no further ado...
Just quickly on the news on the way here tonight, I heard that the old tunnel under the Sydney Harbour Bridge is the go. And so for all the people in St Kilda who think they're being bulldozed, apparently the environment effects...
It's better than being tunnelled.
Well, the environment effects statement for that was also pulled out a lot of holes in it and said that the project appeared to be very unsatisfactory, but they're going ahead with it anyway. What are these things worth?
That's right.
And in that case, the effect statement was actually done by another department.
Yeah, think twice if you've got any great allegiance to Labor governments, and there's no
any governments.
Any governments. There's no politics in natural history. It's who does the best thing. With that in mind, Barry Cohen. Barry Cohen, you're Federal Minister for the Environment, and it's a job that many people know of. It's a very high-profile job. But before you were Federal Minister for the Environment, you were a Shadow Minister, and that was in the Hayden government. Would you like to tell us how you first got into it?
Opposition.
Yeah.
Well, I was elected to the front bench in 1977, and Bill Hayden said to me, well, would you like to take sport, recreation, tourism and the environment? And sport and tourism I'd been very heavily involved with for many years, but the environment was, I was very sympathetic and understand, in favour of protecting the environment. I didn't know a lot about it back in those days, and I really have to thank Bill Hayden very much, because he, giving me the job, forced me to go out and look at areas and experience things that I would never have done if I hadn't been made the Minister of the Environment.
Right, before that, I suppose the scene for a politician as far as your recreational time would have been a lot more around like plays and outs and barbecues and fundraising and that kind of stuff. And so would you reckon it sort of changed your life a bit to get out to the bush and camp?
Absolutely, because, I played squash and golf and did all the sorts of things, but I got most of my environment experience from television and reading about it.
Right.
And I suddenly realised that I had to get out into it and feel it. And I used to 2 or 3 times a year, I'd take my family, my 3 sons, who were young boys then, and we'd go out. And, for instance, we went out and did something I hadn't done since I was in National Service. I camped in the bush. I went out through Palm Valley, Kings Canyon, Ayers Rock, the Olgas, Hermansburg and places like that, and I really experienced it. I went, we tramped all over Fraser Island, all over the Darling Ranges, and got to know it. And I'm forever grateful for Bill Hayden for giving me that job, because it gave me a feeling about the environment that I'd never have got otherwise.
Right, now, as you mentioned, in that portfolio, environment was one of 4 particular areas you had to deal with, and now it's changing considerably. Now it's just arts and the environment for you.
It's arts, heritage and the environment.
Right.
Heritage means museums, galleries, libraries and things like that.
But the workload for the environment part has increased, hasn't it?
This will come as a shock to you, but outside the Prime Minister, Paul Keating and I receive the most correspondence of any minister. It's in excess of 20,000 letters a year.
I hope it's not all hate mail for both of you, is it?
Well, no, it's not. On the contrary, in the last 12 months, we've been getting, there was a lot of mail that we were getting that was very critical of us for things that we perceived not to have done. But in the last 6 months, it's been terrific. It's all turned around and we're getting lots of nice letters, which is always very pleasant.
Okay, now the workings of a Federal Minister for the Environment, the particular areas that you can and can't work in. You've got this division that's becoming very clear now with Tasmania and the logging the Lemmantine, and particularly the Barrier Reef Islands, between federal powers and state powers. And so how does it sort out? What is your charter in a general sort of form? What do you see as the role of the Federal Ministry for the Environment?
Well, one of the problems that we face is that when the Australian Constitution was drawn up, almost 100 years ago, environment was not an issue. It barely was 20 years ago. And so there's no provision for the Commonwealth to have a role, quote, in the environment. Land use management decisions are the prerogative of the states. But there are powers that the Commonwealth has found or discovered that it's had through, Commonwealth territories, the Commonwealth land, overseas and interstate trade and commerce, external affairs, corporations, taxation, defence, and, in granting financial assistance to the states. Now, that may sound a lot, but it's still fairly limiting. But what we are doing, clearly, for instance, you mentioned the Franklin River, we had been signatories to the UNESCO Convention on World Heritage. That was an international treaty that Australia had signed, an international convention, rather. And we had given a commitment to the rest of the world that we would protect those areas of World Heritage value. When the Franklin debate came up, the area had been on the World Heritage List, we enacted legislation in Australia to give us the powers to protect the areas that we had given an obligation to the rest of the world to protect. So that was a power that we previously had not had that we now have.
And these are the particular powers that you're talking about now, that in the setting up of the negotiations and the inquiry into the alternatives to logging at the Levantine.
That's right. Yes.
Right. Now, with the new environment movement, many country people, and particularly country listeners to this show, are very worried that there's a small group of greenies in Melbourne and Sydney and Canberra and Perth who run around the countryside and have these groups, and actually when you go into their memberships, they're quite small, like nothing like, for instance, maybe the National Trust or something like that. In Victoria, I think ACF, 1,000 compared to 25,000 for those groups, and a lot smaller than the Country Women's Association even. And that the people in them aren't necessarily all that well versed in biology, and yet they seem to have, the rural people feel that they seem to have an unprecedented effect on how decisions are made in regard to logging, in regard to fishing and so on. Now, particularly in regard to logging, because this is an issue in both the Queensland tropical rainforest and the southern Tasmanian forest. Now, for those people, your advice is, how do you react to, what's this greenie lobby? How do you perceive it? How do you meet these people? Who do you listen to among those crowds?
Amongst the environmentalists?
Yeah.
Oh, Bob, that's a difficult question. Obviously, I have, as the minister...
You set up a group, though, haven't you?
Well, yes. There was a lot of misunderstanding about what the government was doing, so we now have meetings 3 times a year with what we describe as the Peak Conservation Council. I suppose it's like the ACTU of the environment movement. There's groups like the Wilderness Society, the ACF, the various national trust bodies and conservation councils of each state, etc. And I meet with them and spend a couple of days with them, and they raise all the issues and find out what the government's position. They don't, some things we agree on, some things we disagree on. But I understand the point you're making. I recently, in fact only 3 weeks ago, flew to Brewarrina, which is in western New South Wales, and they'd organised a meeting of farmers. It was, I think, the Livestock and Graziers Association, and they had 300 people in Brewarrina, and I came up to address them about the government's policies on the environment. And it was obviously, for someone like myself, perhaps going into Daniel and the Lion's Den. A lot of the problems that they had were with the state government, not with us. And I just put the government's position on a whole range of issues. We had a very amicable 2 or 3 hours. The issue that I was most concerned with them was the question of kangaroo management, which I've taken a very strong support for the farmers' position there, and in this particular case, a classic example that you're talking about, 2 or 3 only minor groups in Australia with very small membership have set themselves up as the spokespersons on kangaroo management. The majority of the environment groups, from the ACF through the World Wildlife Fund, Queensland Conservation Council, Eco Fund, etc., support or understand the reason for the need to cull kangaroos. But it's the 2 or 3 small groups that get all the publicity here and overseas that create the impression amongst farmers that there's total opposition to a management program, a culling of kangaroos throughout the whole of Australia by the environment movement. So I said to them, look, please be fair to the environment movement. Don't attack the whole movement on the basis of 2 or 3 fairly eccentric groups.
With that kangaroo shooting, it's an interesting problem because you're mentioning the environment movement on one hand and these various lobbies, but what about the base biological data? Like, so often the attitude to biologists is quite strange. Like, people don't have carpenters to fix their cars, but bureaucrats with absolutely no background in biology whatsoever seem to make decisive decisions about management.
Well, what you say is absolutely correct. The whole... Not only do these groups cause some troubles here, they cause enormous troubles overseas. With a kangaroo management program, they're feeding disinformation to America, Europe.
But just this thing about the
let me just get to it.
Okay.
And what I've said to them is the impression that they're trying to create overseas is that all the National Parks and Wildlife Service of Australia, state and federal, the CSIRO, the universities, the state ministers, are all in a massive conspiracy to obliterate the kangaroo. And I said, for the last 20 years, these few groups have been saying the kangaroo is about to going into demise. We have the best scientific brains in Australia working on this program. And every year, 2 million to 3 million kangaroos are culled. The people who are our opponents on this issue produce no evidence, no biological data. We have to produce the scientific material every year. Each year we cull 3 million kangaroos. If they were right 10 years ago, how come there's any kangaroos left in this country today? Well, you're absolutely right. We have to produce the evidence. They produce nothing. They make the most outrageous claims about kangaroos and never have to prove their case with scientific data.
Well, to carry on kangaroos further, we interviewed a kangaroo shooter on air about 12 months ago, and he, like quite a few other people, not so much when he was working in Queensland, but when he came down south and started to think about it, started to see that kangaroo farming would be a really viable alternative, particularly in the semi-arid country. Now, even without kangaroos' value for meat, which is something that has got not much support, obviously in the rural community that's committed to traditional livestock values, but certainly biologically with 70% of the animal being edible as opposed to 35 for a sheep or a cow, with the meat having no cholesterol and being probably a very high-valued export meat if it got into European or Asian markets, there would be no problem. But even on the basis of the hide alone, that many times he said the farmers were getting quite jealous of the shooters for making more money per night culling the kangaroos on their properties than what they were getting from the cattle. Now, do you think there could be any federal initiative towards looking at kangaroo farming as an alternative?
Well, I don't want to go that far. I've got...
but is it something you... I'm not saying make a commitment now, but is it something that you...
It's possible. I'm not sure that it's something that I, as Environment Minister, would want to embrace at this stage. No. My main concern has been to maintain the populations of kangaroos at reasonable levels across their broad habitat and to institute a program of culling, keeping the numbers in reasonable proportions, because if we don't, and if we have good seasons, as we've had in most parts of Australia in the last few years, and the populations explode, then and the industry collapses because of bans on the export of skins overseas, then what will happen? The farmers will take the problem into their own hands. Most of them are not professional shooters, and worse than that, they will start poisoning. And as you know, poisoning of laying poison for animals is not species specific. It'll not only kill kangaroos, it'll kill a lot of other things besides. Yeah, so that the kangaroos will die anyhow. They'll die in a much less humane way.
Right, okay. That's accepted, though, that there is that problem with kangaroos. And that problem with poisoning is one we have in Victoria more with the Forest Commission here than have with the farmers. But leaving that aside from that, the most important thing, though, the thing that seems to stand out is if you've got to shoot 2.5 million kangaroos to keep X number of million of cows alive every year, if the cattle need improved pasture, improved fencing, fertilisation, veterinary care to be rounded up from stock, they have to be transported incredibly long distances, if not as much of the cow as meat. If the quality of the export meat, which is after all a major part, is generally recognised as being poor from the stringy beasts that are running around, surely then just on an economic basis, not an emotive basis, but on an economic basis, looking back to the Australian stock, because it's a European inherited thing. Look, wouldn't that be a good sort of thing for the federal ministry?
As I said, I go back to what I said. I'm not yet prepared to come out as Environment Minister and say I'm in favour of farming. I'm not yet also convinced there's the market for it, because firstly, Australians are not into eating kangaroo meat.
I fed a heap of wallaby on the island and they went ape over it. We had a heap of tourists, a good random selection on Flinders Island, tourists from Melbourne.
There's a bit eaten in South Australia.
Yeah, in Tasmania, it's on all the menus. You go down to Cape Barren Island, wallaby patties, wallaby burgers. Yeah. And, you know, you don't go down to the local
I must say I've never eaten
pet shop. Well, we'll work out something there, no trouble. But, you know, so there is, but that's the kind of stuff that I feel, I'm not saying, make this great commitment on air now, but it's the kind of stuff I feel that where the Federal Department for the Environment, like with two people debating should we shoot kangaroos or should we not shoot kangaroos, the emotional debate. I think that even with kangaroos providing an income from the export of their skins as a wild skin animal is a good thing, but if there was kangaroo farming from a conservation point of view, it means that the ultimate result of farming kangaroos, they can't be transported, so they have to be shot in the paddock. So there's none of the cruelty in transport. There's none of the shots. The breeding programs are difficult. You have to accept what you get, which is usually quite okay. And so there's a whole lot of advantages that an initiative towards maybe funding a study or to setting up a committee to oversee a study will never come from the from Karen's department, because the farmers had screamed they'd go off their heads. But it's quite possible.
They would.
It's quite possible to have it justified, perhaps from federal ministry. Now, I can't ask you for another answer. You've already given us 3. But now, with your personally, with this portfolio, it's seen so often that Labor governments are principally concerned with schools, hospitals, and dunnies, and that we've seen
That's terrible, Bob.
with the for votes, and we've seen with
I know there's a lot of votes in dunnies, if I may say.
public ones.
Like
There's
Les
a few. So the interest in the environment was sort of a lot of people have cynically said that, and not so cynically, that all the interest in the environment around the Franklin River time was to get in and solve that issue in Tasmania at a time to get the electoral support for it, and then after that the whole thing faded. And then around about late last year, surveys and polls were released that showed a bigger percentage of the population were interested in conservation, and so it's all picked up again. Has there been
Bob,
better continuity?
I couldn't disagree with you more. We've agreed so far on everything. But look, you know the problem in Australia in the media. Good news is not a headline story. And the work that we've done in the area, first of all, the Franklin Dam. But, when we came to office, 14% of the Great Barrier Reef region was in the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. That is 7.5 years under the Fraser government. I brought that up to 98.5% in the matter of 18 months. When we announced that, after years of debate on the Great Barrier Reef, barely rated a mention. It's not the sort of thing that headlines wacko that did,
Yeah.
So we declared stage 2 of Kakadu National Park. We stopped mining on Moreton Island. We did 101 things: the Impact of Proposal Act, the Sea Dumping Act, education programs. We went ahead, but again, it was good news. I told the story today on the ABC that when we had classic media, when we had the debate earlier this year about bringing in the dolphin from Papua New Guinea, remember Tarama?
Right.
And there was opposition because of our legislation from people like Project Jonah and to bringing in dolphins to put them in. We wanted to go to SeaWorld in Surfers Paradise.
Right.
There was opposition to bringing another one into captivity. If it was let out up in New Guinea, it would die because it had been brought up in captivity. It wouldn't be able to look after itself. So everyone wanted to interview me on the program and say, what are you going to do? I had 10,000 petitions, cases of them arrived in my office to save Tarama and bring it to Queensland. So finally we came up with this decision, after being badgered by all the television programs to go on. We would bring it in, we would rehabilitate it, and then we would release it into the sea after a period of 12 to 18 months. Everybody rang and said, that's the perfect solution. So then we ran back the media and said, well, we'd like to do that interview. They said, look, now you solved the problem. We're not really interested. Now, that's the problem that we've had. We've been going on with, I honestly will back our record on the environment against any government in history. People talk now through rose-coloured glasses of the Whitlam government about what a terrific environment. And it did some wonderful things. It set up the inquiry into the national estate. It started the national estate grants. It started impact environmental legislation. It set up the inquiry into Fraser Island. It set up the inquiry into Ranger. But the hard decisions that it had to make, it backed off. And I had to talk to Gough recently, and then we had a bit of an argument about it. And I said, listen, mate, Lake Pedder, you didn't do a thing.
But there was a Labor government in Tassie then.
It was still, we were even worse.
Yeah, well, it's Liberals there. Now it's easy to swipe.
But they backed off on Lake Pedder.
Right.
And remember what Rex Connor wanted to do in Kakadu? He wanted to mine the lot, and he wanted to have processing plants turning uranium into, into the full bit
Plutonium, right.
and flog it off all over the world. He wanted to mine Fraser Island. I mean, people forget that the hard decision, it was the Fraser government, to its credit, that set up Kakadu National Park. It was the Fraser government that stopped mining on Fraser Island. So whilst I think the Whitlam government had a terrific record because it was the first real environment government in Australia's history. It laid the foundation for lots of things that we could do now. But we've had, in hard decisions, such as Kakadu, Franklin River, Moreton Island, Barrier Reef, we've had to make the hard decisions. And now the Lemontine, Shelburne Bay, we've had to make real tough decisions, and we've been in confrontation with the states over it.
Now, but you've been in confrontation with the states, but you've been so far that all the issues you've mentioned, you've been in confrontation with states of opposite political polarity. So you've been in confrontation with Tasmania and confrontation with Queensland.
Right.
Now, in the time of Lake Pedder, when Whitlam
And the
was
Northern Territory, yeah.
Right. Well, yes, right. Another hostile lot. In the time of Lake Pedder, that was a state Labor government in Tasmania, and that
Would have
was
been easier
reluctant.
to resolve.
Well, yeah, or more difficult, because if it was a federal Labor government sticking it up, so
Now,
to speak.
I'm not going to go over the whole Lake Pedder issue. I'm
No,
saying
no,
that
no.
the people who turn around and say, look, if only we had a government like the Whitlam government on the environment, our record
Well, I don't think
is as good, if not better.
right.
Is as good, if not better.
You'll
than
have
the
our
Whitlam.
country listeners just turning in their grave with that kind of comment. If only we had a government
but
as
on-
good as Whitlam, they're
On
not real
environmental
popular.
issues, we have taken,
Yeah.
I believe, very sensible. I've just mentioned the.
But what about
the
what
issues.
about areas in state Labor governments that are a similar ilk? For instance, wood chipping at Eden. Now, that's an area where the wood chipping industry has got very dubious economics. That the total outlay in port facilities, road facilities, and everything provided by the people in the state of New South Wales and federally, I suppose, as far as whatever federal grants for war facilities go. It's said by economists not to balance very well from the total income that comes. The loss to the fishing industry from the destruction of estuaries, the loss to tourism from the destruction of a lot of areas that were previously good for tourism, the losses to the sawmilling industry, that 6 or 7 mills lost in that region because
There's also a hell of a lot of
timber's
jobs involved.
Well,
in it,
there is,
thousands.
but it's argued, well, not thousands, you're talking
Well,
a couple of hundred
yeah,
jobs.
No. But these are the direct jobs and there's the indirect jobs.
But those indirect jobs were there with the fishing industry and with the. But anyway, regardless of whether you or I is right or wrong on it, if it was indeed an important issue, how would you handle now tackling somewhere like New South Wales? Would it be the same?
Well,
if we got the same, if the same thing happened in New South
Okay.
Wales, what happened with Joe Bjelke-Petersen in Queensland?
You're right when you say that the confrontation has occurred between the Tasmanian and Queensland governments and not with the Labor states. I can't prove, but I suspect that in the case of the two non-Labor states, a great deal of what the confrontation has occurred because we've been seeking environmental solutions to the problems. They've been seeking political solutions. They see an advantage in
Being opposed to you.
politically
Right.
and the states' rights issue and creating fear in people's minds.
The big socialist buggy in Canberra coming down
That's
to
right.
crush all you.
And it's been going on for a century in this country, and it's nothing new. But they see political mileage in it. Now look at the Franklin River.
Mm.
If ever there's a decision where we were proven to be right, it was that one. Now, 4 years down the track, all the figures that the HEC put up about the need for electricity have been shown to be way out.
Mm.
And we'd have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on that dam there. You've ruined the whole area. And the electricity that they claimed they were going to need was never going to be required.
But if there's a change of government federally, couldn't that decision be reversed and the dam be built?
Look, no government can what's the word,
Make a decision for
for
the
future
yeah.
governments. We don't know. Sure, anything can be reversed.
But that's one of the problems with the Franklin issue. Was an issue in point where a lot of conservationists and the federal government and many people joined to fight that dam proposal and won, but won over the top of Tasmanians. And so the hostility created in Tasmania
it was terrible.
is phenomenal. And that's even flowed across Bass Strait. The word Greenie was reborn, and people sort of divided communities and caused a lot of hostility, divided families in some cases. And so now when you go to Tassie, if you go bushwalking, you're quite likely to have the tyres let down in your car. If you go to the pub, if you don't go to the right pub and have the right demeanour, you get snotted. And so it's created a whole lot of animosity in that decision. Do you think that there may be and now of course that's flown on because the problems you've got at the Lemontine, I suppose you could say that the Franklins set that up. Is there an independent way? We've got the Heritage Commission legislation, we've got national estate, but is there a way of negotiating with these more hostile governments about a set of agreements as to what should be preserved before the issue comes up? In other words, baseline criteria that it may have nothing to do with national estate or World Heritage because they're outside made decisions.
Well, it's not all confrontation. Again, it's the story that the areas where you cooperate never get a headline. For instance, the Great Barrier Reef. Now, we do have an extraordinarily good relationship. It's a joint cooperative venture between Queensland and the Commonwealth on the Barrier Reef. We operate together. We have the Barrier Reef Authority and we do all the basic research and zoning and management plans. The Queensland National Parks and Wildlife Service run it for us. I've just come back from Queensland where I met with Sir Joe. We had a full agenda. We went through all the items. No problems of any significance at all. But nobody is like, the press don't write. Bloke said, Mr. Cohen, nice fellow. There's only one thing wrong with him. And what's that? He ought to be in the national park. God, the phone in Queensland never stopped running hot, So
so there's common ground even with Joe.
It's just that you only hear about the confrontation because that's what the media are interested in. Right. Can I tell a story?
Yeah, go for it.
We have one of the problems we have is with import and export of native species. Well, recently I heard that in one of the customs houses up north, the officers noticed a terrible smell. And they ratted around, if that's the right word, and found this box with some holes in it and opened up and there's a dead tabby cat in it. And they thought, oh, God, we're going to be in trouble here. So they had a little grey tabby and they buried the other one and put it in the box. And the next day the woman came to claim the cat. She opened it up and she said, the cat jumped out and she said, that's not my cat. And they knew it was identical because they'd been very careful. And she said, well, madam, it is your cat. And they said, no, she said, it's not my cat. They said, well, madam, it is. She said, it's not my cat. She said, they said, well, how do you know? She said, my cat was dead. I sent it up to have it buried. So, that's the funny side of the environment.
Yeah, no, well, that's good because do you think you can get to a relationship like that with Robin Gray that you got?
Well, again,
can you get on with him as a bloke?
We have a ministerial council that runs the Southwest World Heritage Area, the park.
Right.
After the settlement, we provide $2 million a year. It's going to be a little bit more than that. And we meet, and I was there in November, and Premier, myself, and Peter Hodgman spent 2 days travelling around the park looking at the work that we've done that they've done with the funds we provided them with. We had some agreement, but by and large we get on. The program's working well. They want more money, of course. They always do.
But I mean,
that's not a headline story,
right?
But
it's a less workable relationship.
Robin Gray's a very, very tough politician, and he also uses every issue that he can to score off us. I think we could resolve the Lemontine Southern Forest without any problem at all if there was a willingness on their side. But, I mean, he sees the political mileage he got out of the Franklin Dam, even though we were shown to be right. As you pointed out, a lot of the old Labor voters, particularly in that area around Queenstown and Strawn, have gone over to Robin Gray. Now, he sees, I think, this is another issue where there's political mileage for him. We could resolve the problem very quickly because we believe the small areas threatened in the national estate can easily be substituted for areas in other parts.
But we've got to go through this whole inquiry procedure to play the politics of it.
That's right.
Right. Okay, well, look, thanks a lot. That's been an excellent interview. And
Next time I come on, I'll tell you some more stories like
Yeah,
that.
blood oath. Well, we might even wreck out another tape. But and hopefully we can get you for comment on air sometimes. Eh?
Okay.
Yes, interview with Barry Cohen. A few
And
fluffs from Uncle Bob there with no sleep.
The poor old country listeners, they're all in their graves, aren't
Yeah,
they?
sorry about that. My apologies to country listeners. No, you know what I was trying to say. Raved on a bit much, but anyway, that's par for the course. But basically, he strikes you as a really good bloke when you meet him. Very pragmatic sort of politician. You know, you can't
Yeah.
agree with their weak needness. But it was an interesting thing at the press conference beforehand. People were asking about the press conference was a real non-event because there was no real federal political issues in operation. Gee, that came through good. There's no federal political issues firing up, and reporters are all sort of floundering around, just sort of looking at him and asking him, chased him around about industrial waste disposal or something like that for about an hour, and sort of got quite lost. But one thing he did point out was that his failure to act on Cape Tribulation and the Daintree 3 years ago, and I was one of the ones who was getting up him about that, was that it wasn't listed as heritage area. He has a very clear perception of what he will and won't act on, and I think in a relatively hostile cabinet, if he's got a heritage listing for an area, he'll fire. But if he hasn't got it, he won't do nothing. And the same with the kangaroo shooting. The obvious thing in that was that if he had research that he could believe from a credible source that would change kangaroo shooting, like that the cull was too big or it should be farming, I think again he'd change, but he'd have to see something bloody concrete. And so in a way it's an eye, and also he had a really pragmatic attitude towards other politicians, like even doing a Joe imitation. Anyway, so much for Barry Cohen. We're going to have a track pretty soon and come back and talk to John Stevens, who will get him to do a rerun of an excellent wrap-up he did this morning of what's going on in the bush. John Reid, sorry, John. Excellent. Good night tonight, heap ding. And so we'll get him on air and have a talk to him. And just a little bit of a follow-up, we had a couple of phone calls when we went off air from people asking about Green's Bush meeting. It was a very successful meeting. There was some 450 people there. And the thing that came out of that meeting, and actually, if you want to ring about it, if you think you're interested in this idea, you can give us a whistle after the show. But the thing that came out of that meeting is that from the political response, the government's definitely pulled the pin on buying Green's Bush. There's no two ways about it. It seems that the Director of Parks isn't interested in it for some obscure reason, and that's it. A lot of the trouble is that they're just freaking out about what land's worth, and the price of land shot up so much in the last 3 or 4 years. A lot of it to do with the conservation movement, ironically, because land with bush on it, all of a sudden it's worth more money.
If people from Melbourne are heading out to the bush to buy land, well, the country, I mean, they go for it with bush on it.
Well, the idea then is a unit trust, and the unit trust is where people like you out there buy a share, which is quite saleable. You can sell it to someone else later for about $2 to $3 grand, and we accumulate all these shares and we buy this land, and then we have $500 out of each share goes towards, as a guesstimate percentage, goes towards development of the land. And it certainly took off, and lots of people were just ferociously keen on it. We did all the groundwork legally for it last year, so it looks like that could be a real goer. And woe betide anyone who stands in the way of that kind of acquisition, because I tell you what, that'd be the political end. It'd be doom. We could make Dear Joan do a dance.
Yeah, the Victorian Conservation Trust wasn't too hot on the idea.
Competition for them, I think.
But the thing is, it's been done overseas, and it's been done successfully. It's been done in Europe to reserve areas of land such as Green's Bush, which people have seen of going under, and economically it's the only avenue left if the government's not going to pay for it.
Think of the clout you'd get, you know, like if you could raise 1,000 shares at $3 grand, $3 million, that's your first investment. And then you sell another 1,000 shares and another 1,000, and your investment accrues, and you develop your park, and you've got gate tolls for people coming, you've got income, you buy more land. And in the future, governments are definitely pulling the pin on conservation. There's no two ways about it. It's like all green go for developers at the moment. And so that'll be a way out. So that was pretty moderately interesting sort of result of the meeting. And 400 people definitely fired up, and it was great. Average age of, I reckon, 40. And there's nothing like old biddies, mate. They just shit on young crew. They've got that much more fire in their guts. It's unbelievable.
And one other thing, you mentioned that the present owners of the land are a little warmer to the idea once having had it.
One of them
having
definitely.
had the knowledge firsthand rather than pass through other people who tended to distort it somewhat.
One of them definitely was, a lot, spoke to us after the meeting and that, and it was a real non-confrontationist thing, which probably brings us up to this whole deal with the bullshit that's going on with the whole environment movement caper. Like, it just appears from talking around the traps, we're doing a bit of a sniff around to find out what's going on with Conservation Council Victoria and East Gippsland. We've stuffed it up again, Coalition and all these crew. And really, it is a bit of a bloody mess. The intentions of people might be excellent, but the politic is just crook, and their way of approaching things is really banal and bad and unimaginative. Resources are winding down, people burning out. So it's going to be very interesting next 12 months to see what happens. So if you're thinking of joining the Australian Conservation Foundation or something like that and you want to have a vote, now's a very good time to get into it. So anything a bit more hard grunty? We're a bit waffly at the moment.
No, that's all right. See, well, the thing is, Barry wanted to hear some good news, and we're certainly interested in hearing about good news because it gets very depressing if you're seeking around for what's going on in natural history and you only hear bad news all the time. And it's always nice to hear the good stuff, and it's just a bloody pity that when we glean newspapers, it generally is negative a lot of the time.
Yeah, there's so many really bloody positive things. So many people just cracked the shits and said, right, that's it, I'm going to fire up. I don't care what's going to happen. I'm going to turn up, I'm going to do this everywhere, I'm going to plant bloody trees, and I'll learn about the bush. How many of you out there, just stop and think for a minute, you're driving home, we've just got home, you're having your first cup of coffee to relax from the day, or your first whatever. How many of you know much about the bush? Probably bugger all. Get out a pen and paper and see if you can write down the name of 20 native animals, 20 native plants and 20 native birds. Ring us up if you can't do it. If you can do it, ring us up if you can do it. Jesus, we won't get many phone calls. That'd be great. You can ring us while we're on air if you can do it. Like there'll be about 40 people out there in the total world of listeners for sure. That makes 45 with Mum. That's our total.
Ring with one of their stranger tracks.
Told you no ring. Randy rang up and said he got 40 plants.
This is
somebody's going well,
botanist,
but nobody else has rung. Switchboard's blank.
Actually, you might be able to help me on this one. A little critter about yo long, and I'm sort of indicating about 15, 20 centimetres here.
6 inches, yeah.
Well, thereabouts. A little bit smaller than that. Nice white tip on its tail about as long as the body. Scooted across the road in front of the vehicle when we were down the Otways. Would you have any idea?
No. A marsupial mouse.
Something with a white tip tail. It
White
was quite
tip
large.
tail.
Would it be a dunnart?
Not
big enough?
Yeah, maybe. Sounds too big for a dunnart. Was that 6 inches in the body?
No. It was, the whole thing was probably, about that long, about a hand span, the whole animal.
In the body?
Perhaps, no, that's the whole thing.
The whole beast?
A little bit bigger, perhaps.
Might be an antechinus.
No, bigger than an antechinus.
Maybe you'd had some mushrooms. And on that note, we'll talk to John Reid.
Well, we should talk to John Reid too.
You there, John?
Rob, I'm here.
Good on you, mate. We've just been talking about mushies.
We didn't get as far as fungi this morning, did we?
No, and we want to talk about fungus. And it's the fungal season, John. So do you want to tell us a bit about what's going on fungus-wise?
Yeah, right. Well, they're coming up. We need a bit more rain, though. If you get out to the wetter gullies like Brown Hillsville and Warburton, you'll see it a bit. But some really good soaking autumn rains would help, particularly in the drier forests like Van Warrandyte. The season's a bit later, but May and June are generally the best months.
Right, and for the fungi watcher, is there a field guide that's any good?
Yeah, there's 2 books I could recommend. I'm not sure whether they're both available. There's a Field Guide to Fungi of Southeastern Australia by Ross McDonald and John Westerman, which is published by Nelson. That may be out of print. That's got about 100 species and some good information and photographs.
Yeah, I've seen it around still.
Right. And more recently is a field companion to Australian fungi by Bruce Fura, published by, I think, 5 Mile Press, with excellent photographs, and again, I suppose about another 100 to 150 species.
That's a really good book from our top fungi man, really, isn't it, Bruce?
A terrific fungi person and just a great general all-round naturalist, Bruce Fura. Terrific book, and unfortunately, both those books really only scratch the surface in terms of species because there are so many of which aren't known very well or described as yet, but it's a good start.
And we were talking this morning about insects coming and going. Would you like, just for our evening listeners, John, to run over a bit of what's going on bug-wise?
What's going on bug-wise?
Yeah, our MMBW moth, perhaps.
A couple of moths around here. I did mention that white satiny thing, which some friends of mine call the MMBW moth because it's got sort of M's and W's on its forewings. It's one you'll get at your outside lights tonight if you got them on. It's around. It's always an autumn emerging species, which only sort of flies once a year because it has a very long pupation period, which is just over. And the adults of those will be mating and laying eggs very soon. With some good rains coming up, we'll have swift moths around, and there's other things around like gumley skeletonizer moths at the moment are having their first of 2 generations for the year. It's a little drab grey thing that'll be at the lights tonight also.
Right. That's gumley skeletonizer. How big is the caterpillar that does the skeletonizing of gumley?
Oh, it's about, I suppose, centimetre and a half, something like that. Takes 5 molts to get there, and each time it molts, it sort of keeps the bit of skin that it was covering its head up, its head capsule, and manages to sort of have that stuck on its new head. So by the time it's molted 5 times to be fully grown, it's got a little sort of flagpole arrangement of 5 empty head capsules on its head, which is obviously some deterrent to predators or something to sort of make it look different than it really is. It's a very incredibly common caterpillar when it's around. You find it on any eucalypt anywhere, just about.
Furry buggers?
Yeah, very hairy.
I know the beast. Yeah.
Comes out twice a year. Has 2 flight periods. One about now, so you'll expect a lot of eggs and eggs, say very soon, and then caterpillars coming into early spring around about football time. You'll get, football finals time, should I say. You'll get another lot of adult caterpillars, big caterpillars, and then some moths flying, and then another lot around about summer.
Right. Okay. And we mentioned this morning the bargong moths and that too.
Yep.
And there we're bound to see some of them pretty soon as they head for their hibernation in the mountains.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I've seen those, of course, down around here in the past, but I've never seen those big occurrences that you were referring to this morning. But they're, of course, well documented in Australia, especially with their connections with Aboriginal feeding.
Right.
They used to sort of make the trek up there and, have a big feast on these oily bodies or whatever fatty moth bodies that they found very nice.
If people are interested in insects and moths and butterflies in particular, John, can you recommend any books or societies or sources of information?
Well, there's the Victorian Entomological Society, which is the only group that, I guess, deals specifically for insect watchers in Victoria, but that would be a good organisation to contact for information. If you're taking a general interest and you want to take a natural history approach, there's a very good book, which I haven't got in front of me at the moment, but it's by Hadlington and Johnson, which is only small. It's called Australian Insects. It's only got about 110 pages in it, but they cram an amazing amount of relevant material into 110 pages. And if you want to get an idea of how the various orders and groups of insects work, where they fit in easy to understand descriptions that are backed up by extremely good photographs and diagrams, that'd be the starting point. And from then you can go right up to our most technical book on insects, the CSIRO's Australian Insects, which I think costs about $40 or $50. I think it's about to be revised. And it's basically a textbook for students and field workers, people in agriculture and entomology generally who'd want a textbook. But that's also very valuable, but not the book to start with.
Right. There's another book too that I could recommend in the Australian Naturalist Library series, which you may find around, Rigby Press, I think, and that's just simply called Australian Insects, which is another really excellent book for giving you the basics on insects, the life cycles to distinguish the 3 basic groups of insects, and pick up lots of juicy facts like silverfish living for 17 years and things like this that really blow people right out when they realise that these things they squash have actually got life cycles that are quite long. Okay, John, well, that's excellent. Any other tips for coming seasons? Any special birds or mammals antechinus aren't about to mate themselves ferociously to death, are they? Not for another couple of months? No.
It's a while off, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, just a couple of things this morning that I didn't get round to mentioning on bird movements. There are some local movements of birds happening at the moment. For example, pied currawong are coming into the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. I don't know whether they're coming to any of the others, but they're an altitudinal migrant that comes down from the highlands, and they're making their normal April arrival out my way here at Heathmont. and they'll stick around making a lot of noise and eating berries off peppercorn trees and grubs in the gardens, etc. for about another, I guess 4 or 5 months. I'll probably fly back in August to breed up in the hills. That's one. Another thing I think is very conspicuous at the moment, you get out into that beautiful heathy Banksia country around about places like Kinglake and the back of Heedlesville and Warburton and Gembrook at the moment. If you get out into that heathy woodland, you'll hear the crescent honeyeaters out there at the moment in their, large numbers, because they're all out there feeding on Banksia spinulosa, the hairpin Banksia, which has just started flowering the last week or so.
Yeah, actually, there's a lot of silver Banksia flowering as well.
Yep.
And nighttime, it's a great feeding place for moths if you get a torch and just shine it on. And if you're lucky enough, you can catch a hold of gliders and all sorts of things like that.
We
so
can hear you a lot better now, Roger.
That's great. I think that you couldn't find a better place to go at the moment for natural history, because the fungi is very good in those areas too if we get a bit of rain. And you get these masses of honeyeaters in those areas with the Banksias flowering. And somebody who goes out there might be able to work out what critter it is that cuts the Banksia cones up into sort of little discs like wheels. I've had a few theories, but you'll see what I mean when you get out there. If you're in the right area, you'll see the Banksia spinulosa flowers actually as if they've been dissected into sections.
Right, I've seen that, yeah.
Something bites them up for some reason, maybe just for fun, but I'd suggest it's probably something like a rosella or maybe even a cockatoo, but that's just a guess.
Yeah, you've seen what the yellow-tailed cockatoos are doing at this time of the year to the silver wattles, haven't you?
Yeah, they really do a good job on those.
They fell one 20 foot high up behind my place. No one would ever guess that a cockatoo could have such a wicked beak. That was the end of the tree going for barty grubs. What are those big grubs in the wattle trees? Do you know, John, what particular species of insect they are from?
I think they'd often be, they could be wood-boring beetles, like the larvae of the longicorn beetles.
Right.
The adults of those may be around tonight if the night's fairly mild at lights. That's the thing that has the big long antennae that, move very quickly.
Right.
Often there's a species around with a sort of a blacky brown and gold-coloured back.
Right.
It could be the grubs of that. Also wood-boring moth caterpillars like the ghost moth, cossid species that is, I think, related to the true witchetty grub. And in fact, it is the one that I think is now currently being developed as an export item to Asia or somewhere like that as a food delicacy, that grub. Up in large quantities in New South Wales somewhere. I remember seeing an article in the paper some months ago about that. It could be that also, because some of those wood moths, those cossids, actually bore into wood also.
All right, mate. Well, look, thanks a lot for that, and I'm sure the listeners will get a few good tips out of that yak. All right, and we'll catch up with you again soon, John.
See you later.
See you, mate.
And what I've been doing, I've been looking at mushies for the last couple of years, and I'll be going out this autumn and looking for extra edible ones. If I survive, I'll certainly be keeping listeners up with which ones are safe to have a go at and which ones aren't.
There's a ripper account in Australian Wild Foods of, is it Cripps, the guy who wrote that?
Crib.
Crib,
Yeah,
that's right. And in the mushies section that he ate the psilocybin mushrooms, came home and got colour reception on his black and white TV.
Yes.
And decided it was time to consult medical advice. Someone should have told him. Anyway, so that's it. The parrot's starting to sound a bit more like a natural thing, and John Reid has certainly been a fantastic bonus, and he will bring us more reports in the future about what's going on in the bush, and if we can find Fabian or Neil Douglas around the place, we might do the same. Okay, Scripts of the Air's coming up soon. Next week, it's a potpourri of whatever we can find for next week.
And
anything else?
It'll be full of it too. Yes, if someone has last week's hypothetical, Jeffrey Robinson hypothetical about the fictitious state of Vandemania, and they could see to lending it to me for a couple of days, could they please ring 4192066?
That's right. And if anyone else is out there and you want to get out in the prom and do a bit of diving and cruising around and that, just give us a call again on 4192066. If you've got harassment or an issue or a bit of juicy information you think should go to air, again, give us a whistle. Okay, this is Bob McDonald and saying goodbye to Ray.
Goodbye.
Ray, our on-air silent host tonight. He'll be on